All praises, all praises, all praises to the heavenly, holy, almighty creator of infinity, eternity, the universe, the stars, the earth, the mountains, the oceans, the valleys, the seas, the clouds, all creeping things, humanity, and all there is. This is Revelations.UNVEILED.DETROIT. Hello, family. We are back together again. We are congregating and aggregating and conjugating and convocating as we step up to the threshold of transmission to receive the holy mission. And we have exposed our cranial universes and bear forth our souls to receive the frequency and holy communication of the information from the creator of all imagination. All praises into the scattered tribes of the house of Israel, wherever you may sojourn on planet Earth. My continuous petition and prayer for your care and safety, and for my brothers and sisters of the world, the pending Israelites, those who refer to themselves as the melanated and Moors, the original man and children of God, the sovereigns and sojourners, the copper-colored, the colored, and people of color, the aboriginals and indigenous, the natives, Negroes, and niggas, the African Americans and blacks, the descendants of slaves, and those conquered and colonized. Oh yes, and we are blessed. And family, I am here before you to make presentation in the greatest level of humility, honor, privilege, and pleasure. And tonight, as the nation of Israel is into celebrating of the new year, as we get ready for our first holy day, which is the Passover. It is the testimony of our ancestors leaving out of our first captivity in Egypt. And family, we will continue this evening as we deliberate and contemplate and mentally marinate on the history and the mystery of the nation as we initiate the reconciliation of the nation back to the covenant. And tonight, as the heathen, as the unlearned, and as those in darkness prepare to celebrate the pagan holiday of Easter, as they have just so recently began to be called Resurrection Sunday. We are going into the depths of history to explore the foundations of the so-called holiday of Easter. And so, family, we will begin to dine on the divine wine of the wisdom of the history that is so much neglected in our common curriculum within this continental captivity of our current existence. And so we shall begin our exploration at the Revelations.UNVEILED.DETROIT channel standards in the book of Malachi, chapter 3, verse 6. For I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, you sons of Jacob are not consumed. Followed by our second heavenly internal standard in the book of Hebrews, chapter 13, verse 8, in reference to the holy anointed Messiah, the wonderful, the Redeemer, the Savior, the King of Israel, whom the word refers to as Jesus Christ, the same yesterday and today and forever. Oh yes, family, as we converge into the Revelations.UNVEILED.DETROIT den and enjoy the glow and the warmth of the fireplace, as we gather into our cups the fine chocolate cocoa or the refined tea, as we have extended our arms and given out our loving embrace, and stared into the eternities in the eyes of the souls of our fellow beings in our consensual assembly of care, comfort, compassion, safety, and love. And so as we find our place in a soft space and we gather the hands of our neighbors, we shall begin as we become still and quiet, so that we may receive as we perceive and believe. And we shall begin with ISHTAR, the explanation of Easter. The Babylonian equivalent, Ishtar, Inanna, is an ancient Mesopotamian goddess associated with love, beauty, sex, desire, fertility, war, justice, and political power. She was originally worshipped in Sumer and was later worshipped by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians under the name Ishtar. Ishtar is the Akkadian counterpart of the West Semitic goddess Astarte. Inanna, an important goddess in the Sumerian pantheon, came to be identified with Ishtar, but it is uncertain whether Inanna is also of Semitic origin or whether, as it is more likely, her similarity to Ishtar caused the two to be identified. Meaning unknown. Ishtar was an Akkadian, Assyrian, Babylonian goddess who presided over love, war, and fertility. She was cognate with the Canaanite and Phoenician Ashtoreth, and she was also identified with the Sumerian goddess Inanna. Ishtar is a goddess of both fertility and war, is the Akkadian name of the Sumerian goddess, and the Sumerian goddess Astarte. The three names referring to the same deity in different cultural context. She inspired great devotion in ancient Babylon, and as evidenced by the many grand temples, altars, inscriptions, and art objects devoted to her. There are two conflicting aspects of this goddess. She was the deity of fertility and love, but also a jealous goddess who could bring vengeance against individuals, go to war, destroy fields, and make the earth's creatures infertile. Ever young, energetic, and passionate, Ishtar was moody, changing rapidly from love to enmity. She protected her favorites, but brought doom upon those who dishonored her, sometimes with terrible consequences for whole nations. The etymology. The name Ishtar is likely Semitic in origin and was identified in ancient times with Canaanite goddess Ashtoreth or Astarte. It is possible that the underlying stem is the same as that of Ashur, meaning the leading one or chief. The older Sumerian name, Inanna, means great lady of An. An, or Anu, being the god of the sky or heaven. Some scholars have suggested that Esther and Mordecai, the heroes of the biblical book of Esther, may be Judaized versions of some lost story about Ishtar and the Babylonian deity Marduk. Their names, at least, are indeed similar to the biblical ones. Scholars likewise speculate that Astore, the Anglo-Saxon goddess of spring, whose name later gave rise to the modern English Easter, may be etymologically connected to Ishtar. The history and character. In the archaeological record, Ishtar, or Inanna, was first worshipped at Uruk in the earliest period of Mesopotamian history. Incantations, hymns, myths, epics, votive inscriptions, and historical annals celebrated and invoked her as the force of life. Ishtar's reign did not normally depend upon a particular male consort, although sometimes portrayed as subject to higher male authorities. Her position in the Babylonian pantheon in practice was the highest. Ishtar's genealogy varies depending on the source. She is sometimes described as the daughter of the moon goddess Ningal and her consort, also a moon god, Sin or Sun, who were of the patron deities of Uruk. In other traditions, however, she is the daughter of the distant sky god An. Later, she is also portrayed as his wife. Temples devoted to the worship of Ishtar in Yana were constructed in each of the great Mesopotamian culture centers. Eanna, house of An in Uruk. Emak, the great house in Babylon. Mash, house of offerings in Nineveh. The Epic of Gilgamesh gives the following description of Ishtar's temple in Uruk. Look at its wall, which gleams like copper. Inspect its inner wall, the likes of which no one can equal. Take hold of the threshold stone. It dates from the ancient times. Go close to Eanna Temple, the residence of Ishtar, such as no later king or man ever equaled. In the 6th century before the Common Era, the great Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II constructed the mammoth Ishtar Gate in honor of the goddess. On monuments and seal-capped cylinders, Ishtar appears frequently as a warrior with bow and arrow and other implements of war. She was invoked as a goddess of battles, particularly among the warlike Assyrians. Before battle, the priestess Vicar of Ishtar would appear before the Assyrian army, clad in battle array and armed with bow and arrow, much like the Greek god Athena. At other times, she is depicted simply clad in long robes with a crown on her head and various animals, bulls, lions, owls, snakes, etc., as her symbol. As the goddess of love and fertility, Ishtar was the guardian of sacred harlots and is described as having sacred priestess prostitutes. Statuettes have been found in large numbers representing her as naked. In Babylon, she was sometimes portrayed Madonna-like as the mother of the god Marduk. In later times, it should be noted, the priestesses of Ishtar were virgins who were not permitted to marry. Together with the moon god, Sin, and the sun god, Shamash, Ishtar is the third figure in a triad personifying the moon, the sun, and the earth. In this trinity, the moon represents wisdom, the sun personifies justice, and the earth represents life force. This triad overlies another, An, heaven, Enlil, earth, and Enki, the watery deep. Ishtar is generally portrayed as the twin of Shamash. Ishtar also appears on the top of the panel of the Uruk vase, one of the most famous ancient Mesopotamian artifacts. The relief of this vase seems to show Ishtar conferring kingship on a supplicant. Various inscriptions and artifacts indicate that kingship was one of the gifts bestowed by Eanna on the ruler of Uruk. In the Babylonian astrology, Ishtar was related to the planet Venus. As the most prominent female deity in the late Babylonian pantheon, she was equated by the Greeks with either or both Hera and Aphrodite. Roman mythology renders Aphrodite as Venus, and thus the planet is indirectly named for Ishtar. The double aspect of Ishtar as the goddess of both fertility and war may correspond with the difference between Venus as the morning star and as the evening star. Ishtar, by various names, continued to be an important deity until the advent of Christianity in the Roman Empire and Islam in the Arabic world and Persia. These monotheistic religions and the civilizations they inspired insisted on the existence of only one deity, a masculine god whose jealousy commanded that he alone be worshipped. Myths concerning Ishtar. An important myth invoking Ishtar is the tale of her descent into the underworld, one of the most striking of the Sumerian myths. This story describes Ishtar passing through 7 gates of hell into the land of no return. At each gate, an article of her clothing and ornaments is removed until at the last gate she is entirely naked. Ishtar then attempts to usurp the throne of her sister, Ereshigal, the queen of the underworld. Ereshigal, however, fastened upon her the eye of death and hangs her, seeming to be a corpse, on a hook on the wall. By intercession of the clever god, her uncle Enki, Ishtar eventually wins release. According to the underworld rules, however, she must find someone to take her place. Eventually, she discovers her beloved husband, TAMMUZ, seated in splendor on her throne. Enraged, she has him seized and dragged below. All right. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Ishtar makes important appearances in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's earliest epic poem. The opening chapter of the story describes the glories of Uruk and praises Ishtar's temple there. Hearing of the existence of the wild man, Enkidu, Gilgamesh does not go himself to subdue this fierce creature, but sends Shamhat, the most skilled priestesses of Ishtar, to civilize him. In another chapter, Ishtar proposes marriage to Gilgamesh, but he declines, knowing that her previous mates have met tragic fates. Insulted by his rejection, Ishtar demands that her father, An, send the bull of heaven to punish Gilgamesh, despite her knowledge that this act will bring famine to the land. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu slay the bull, Ishtar and her priestesses mourn the creature's death, while the men celebrate. However, Ishtar is not heartless toward humans. Later, when Gilgamesh hears the story of the great flood from its only survivor, Utnapishtim, Ishtar shows her deep compassion for mankind. Ishtar shrieked like a woman in childbirth. The sweet voice mistress of the gods wailed. The olden days have alas turned to clay, because I said evil things in the assembly of the gods. How could I say evil things in the assembly of the gods, ordering a catastrophe to destroy my people? No sooner had I given birth to my dear people than they filled the sea like so many fish. In the story of Gilgamesh and the Hulapu tree, Ishtar plants this sacred tree in her garden, where it is guarded by the snake, which knows no charm. Eventually, the tree grows very large, and Ishtar wishes that someone will chop it down and make various items for her from its wood. Gilgamesh complies, both slaying the snake and making timber of the tree. Later, some of the objects he made for Ishtar were dropped into the underworld. Gilgamesh cannot reach them, and so Enkidu volunteers to retrieve them. A version of this story also appears as a 12th tablet in the Epic of Gilgamesh itself. The origin of Easter. The origin of Easter, a holiday associated with the observance of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, is actually based on an ancient pagan celebration. Christians recognize this day as commemorating the culminating event of their faith. But like so many other Christian holidays, Easter has become commercialized and mixed with non-Christian traditions like the Easter Bunny, Easter parades, and hunting for Easter eggs. How did this happen? The origin of Easter dates back to the ancient times, not long after the global flood recorded in Genesis 6 of the Bible. Nimrod, a grandson of Noah, had turned from following his grandfather's God and had become a tyrannical ruler. According to the biblical record, as king, Nimrod created Babel, Nineveh, Ashur, Calia, and other cities, all known for lifestyles that promoted unspeakable evil and perversion. When Nimrod died, his wife, Queen Semiramis, defiled him as a sun god, or deified him as a sun god, or life giver. Later, he would become known as Baal, and those who followed the religion Semiramis created in his name would be called Baal worshippers. They became associated with idolatry, demon worship, human sacrifice, and other practices regarded as evil. The origin of Easter involves the birth of Semiramis's illegitimate son, Tammuz. Tammuz somehow, Semiramis convinced the people that Tammuz was actually Nimrod reborn. Since people had been looking for the promised savior since the beginning of mankind, they were persuaded by Semiramis to believe that Tammuz was that savior, even that he had been supernaturally conceived before long. In addition to worshiping Tammuz, or Nimrod reborn, the people also worshipped Semiramis herself as the goddess of fertility. In other cultures, she has been called Ishtar, Ashtar, and yes, Easter. The origin of Easter goes back to the springtime ritual instituted by Semiramis following the death of Tammuz, who, according to tradition, was killed by a wild boar. Legend has it that through the power of his mother's tears, Tammuz was resurrected in the form of new vegetation that appears on the earth. According to the Bible, it was in the city of Babel that the people created a tower in order to defy God. Up until that time, all people on the earth spoke one language. The building of the tower led God, as recorded in Genesis 11, verse 7, to confuse their tongues, to keep them from being further unified in their false beliefs. As the people moved into other lands, many of them took their pagan practices with them. Contemporary traditions such as the Easter bunny and the Easter egg can also be traced back to the practices established by Semiramis. Because of their prolific nature, rabbits have long been associated with fertility and its goddess Ishtar. Ancient Babylonians believed in a fable about an egg that fell into the Euphrates River from heaven, and from which Queen Astarte, another name for Ishtar or Semiramis, was hatched. For Christians, the origin of Easter is simply the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ about 2,000 years ago. According to the gospel accounts, Jesus Christ, the true Messiah promised in the Old Testament, was crucified and resurrected at the time of the Judean Passover. Since that awesome event took place, those who believe Christ is their Messiah have honored that day and often celebrated it with the traditional Passover. As the gospel of Christ spread throughout non-Jew nations, among people who did not have a history of celebrating the Passover, the pagan rites of Easter gradually assimilated into what the Christian church called Resurrection Day. Compromising the commandments of the power with the comfort of the world is as old as the nation of Israel itself. Actually, American history teaches us that the founding fathers dismissed Easter as a pagan holiday and did not become widely observed until just after the Civil War. All right, family. That was a massive meal of the mystery of the history that you will not receive in your common curriculum in this continental confusion that we are immersed in. And family, we received the history of the baffling and the bumbling and the Babylonian history from Nimrod and the building of the Tower of Babel, even further back to before the Great Flood, as recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the holy history of the scriptures. And we were exposed to the various gods and goddesses worshipped in ancient times. Ishtar or Astarte or Isis. They're all the same. Those were the goddesses and the religious worships the various nations took into their lands after they were scattered and confused of tongue. And we have the history of the beliefs of the Mesopotamians, the first civilization recorded, and the Sumerians, the first civilization to have writing. So family, we have many historical points for those students of history to continue to develop and expand and escalate and elevate as we continue to fill in the potholes of the darkness of ignorance that we were cursed to receive under the Willie Lynch formula. And so, family, as those who come into the truth, the way, and the light, ponder precipitously these precepts, we now can begin to release the shackles of the paganism and the idolatry as we, as the holy nation, prepare to celebrate the true holy day of the Passover. And so, family, as we scurry about and we resume the contemptible, corruptible, carnal existence, we will continue to grow. We will continue to show. We will continue to glow in the light of truth and righteousness. Lord willing, we shall return. We shall continue. And until we are together again, I love you. I love you. I love you. This is Revelations.Unveiled.Detroit.